Seat. My name is Saujanya Jamboni, and I'm with the FDA Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, Office of Strategic Programs. And on behalf of all of my FDA colleagues, I'd like to thank you and welcome you to our 10th Patient-Focused Drug Development meeting. So today's meeting is on Idiopathic Pulmonary Fibrosis, IPF, and we are just so thankful that you're here. We have a lot to learn from you today, and we hope that you share all of your experiences with us, and we're looking forward to a great day of discussion. So I'll be the facilitator for the meeting, and what I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes going over the agenda and a few housekeeping items, and we'll get things started. And you should all have a copy of the agenda. That it was available on the registration desk, but if you don't, just feel free to get one or just raise your hand and one of my FDA colleagues will be happy to help. Okay, so we're going to start off the day with 3 presentations from my FDA colleagues. They will provide some opening remarks, provide an overview of the Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative, and also they'll provide a background on IPF and current therapeutic options. Then I'll come back and go over the discussion format. We have 2 topics for today, so we're going to have a panel discussion followed by a group discussion for each of those topics. So topic 1 is on the most significant symptoms of IPF and how they impact your daily life. Topic 2 is on your perspectives, patient perspectives, on current treatment approaches to IPF. So that'll take us towards the end of the day, and we have the last half hour of the day reserved for open public comment, and I know many of you have signed up for that. So what open public comment is if anybody in the room, not just patients or patient representatives, but if anybody in the room wants to share additional thoughts or comments outside the scope of topic 1 or topic 2, we'll encourage you to sign up for open public comment. And we'll take sign up for public comment through break time. So we'll see how many people have signed up and how much time each speaker will have at that point. And then we'll have some closing remarks, and that will wrap up the day. So it's a full day, but as I mentioned, we're just so thankful and excited to get this meeting going and look forward to learning so much from you. So just a few housekeeping and logistics items. First thing, we do have oxygen available for anyone that needs it during the meeting. We have oxygen support systems, and they've set up a table right outside this doorway. And you can feel free, please get up if you need to go and get additional oxygen. They'll be happy to help you. And restrooms are back out into the lobby area, and if you make a right and go all the way down the hallway, you'll find the restrooms there. And last but not least, we do have a kiosk out there that serves basic sandwiches and snacks and beverages for purchase. So we want you to know that this is a more informal meeting. We want you to be comfortable. If you need to get up and stretch, if you have to take a break, please feel free to do so. Okay? And before we get started with our FDA presentations, can I have each one of you introduce yourselves?
Lydia Gilbert, Mclean, Deputy Division Director, Division of Pulmonary Allergy and Rheumatology Products.
Good afternoon. My name is Banu Karimi Shah. I'm a clinical team leader in the Division of Pulmonary Allergy and Rheumatology Products.
Good afternoon. I'm Teresa Mullen, and I direct the Office of Strategic Programs in the Center for Drugs.
Good afternoon. I'm Ashley Slagle from the Office of New Drugs, Study Endpoints.
Great, thank you. And we have some FDA colleagues here.
Hello, I'm Pujita Vaidya from the Office of Strategic Programs.
Graham Thompson, same office.
Grace Stark, same office.
Great, thank you. Okay, so, and just one additional item, this meeting is being recorded and transcribed, so we'll have the recording and the transcript available shortly after the meeting on our website. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lydia for your remarks.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and welcome again. We are delighted to have you here. at this patient-focused development meeting on idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Again, my name is Lydia Gilbert Mclean, and I'm the Deputy Division Director in the Division of Pulmonary Allergy and Rheumatology Products. And that is the division that is tasked with evaluating and reviewing programs for IPF. We are very happy to be holding this meeting today. We think it is very important, and we are very interested to hear from you, or the patients, about your experiences with IPF. We recognize the disease is characterized by symptoms that can have a significant and devastating impact on the day-to-day lives of patients, and so it is good to see so many of you here today. I also understand that there are several hundred people participating on the web, and we welcome you and we're thankful that you are able to participate. Today's meeting is one in a series of what is called FDA patient-focused drug development meetings. And in a few minutes, my colleague, Teresa Mullen, from the Office of Strategic Programs, will provide you some more information about the patient-focused initiative. IPF, as we all know, is a very serious, debilitating condition that is progressive and often life-threatening, and the causes of IPF are unknown. So this makes it very important from our standpoint to hear from you, to hear your perspectives about how you as patients and patient advocates experience IPF. And in a couple minutes, one of our clinical team leaders, Dr. Banu Karimi Shah, will provide some brief clinical background about IPF. But we think it is very important for us to hear directly from you. How do you experience the different symptoms of IPF? How it affects your daily lives? What you value in treatment for IPF? And what you would like to see in future IPF development programs. Having this kind of dialogue is extremely valuable to us, and your input during this meeting can help us understand how patients view benefits and risks of treating IPF, giving us a better appreciation of your needs as patients from your perspective in a disease that is associated with symptoms that impact your lives on a daily basis can be very valuable to us in understanding what clinical benefits could be meaningful to patients in a clinical trial. While we, the FDA, play a critical role in drug development, remember that we are just one part of the process. We do not develop the drugs, we do not conduct the clinical trials, but instead, our task of protecting and promoting public health is based on the evaluation of the data for safety and efficacy of these new therapies. And we work with drug companies, researchers, patient communities. They are the ones who conduct the clinical trials and submit applications of new drugs for us. We work closely with the companies throughout the drug development program, initially from the early stages of R&D development all the way up through completion of the program and the submission of the new drug application. We recognize that there is representation from industry, academia, and others in the room and on the web today, and we are very glad to see that there is such a high level of interest from those of you who play an important part in drug development. So we thank you again for being here. We thank you for being part of this meeting. We look forward to hearing from you. So we welcome you again. And so I'll turn the podium now over to my colleague, Teresa Mullen, who will share some broader points on the patient-focused drug development at FDA. Welcome.
Thank you, Lydia. And again, I'm Teresa Mullen, and thanks for coming today to White Oak, to our campus, and thank you very much for those of you who've joined us on the webcast. This is just to give you some background on this overall program. FDA, as Lydia was describing, greatly values and needs patient input and understanding of the patient perspective really throughout the process of development and then beyond. But we initiated this program, and I just want to give you the sort of background on this, what we're calling patient-focused drug development program. We developed this in recognition that we didn't really have a way to systematically collect information and the perspectives from a wide range of patients. We had the patient representative program, which is extremely valuable, but really we're only able to have a few participants or representatives in any given disease area. And we have to put those folks through a great deal of screening because they're going to be participating in discussions related to a particular matter that has to do usually with a particular drug product in development or decisions on a particular matters. And we need to screen for conflict of interest and so on. And that sort of limits how much participation and the range of perspectives that we're able to get. And so we needed another format, and this is really one that we committed to do under this reauthorization of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, the 5-year reauthorization that was put in place by Congress in 2012. And it allows us to try to get better input because patients, we recognize, are really the most important perspective. They're the ones suffering from the disease. They're the ones who are going to experience any benefit there is to be gotten from a drug, and they were the ones who are going to experience the risks. And so it's quite critical that we understand their views. And so this approach allows us to really step back out of the context of any particular drug and go in and ask about questions at the disease level, and it enables us to get a much larger and a wide-ranging views of patients who have that disease. We began this process of trying to identify, because we agreed to do at least 20 different diseases over the 5 years of this 5-year program. And so we put out a rather long list, asked for public comment. We got over 4,500 comments from the public on the list that we published. We took that input into consideration, and the diseases that were identified by the public, in addition to the ones our review divisions identified as ones that they felt would be particularly helpful to them. Putting that together, we identified a list of diseases for the first 3 years of the program. So 16 diseases we identified for the first 3 years of the program, and then we're going to be coming out and doing another public Federal Register notice very soon on our proposed disease areas for the final 2 years of this program. We really view this as a sort of pilot to learn how to do this as effectively as possible, with the idea that we'll be continuing it beyond, of course, those 5 years, and we're even talking with patient groups about ways to extend it beyond not just having FDA be the convener of such meetings. How can we also have, and other groups are already doing this, beginning to convene meetings, trying to locate them where FDA can easily show up and participate and listen. And so I think that we want to try to figure out how to expand and sustain this effort going forward and build on it. Here are the diseases that we are undertaking for meetings for 2013, fiscal year 2013 through 15. That's the first 3 years of the 5 years. And those on the left, you can see we've already done the list: chronic fatigue syndrome, HIV, lung cancer, and narcolepsy in our fiscal year 2013, which ended last September. And then in 2014 so far, we've had meetings on sickle cell disease, fibromyalgia, pulmonary arterial hypertension, inborn errors of metabolism, a meeting on bleeding disorders earlier this week, actually, and then today's meeting on idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And as you'll note, we have the next meeting we have scheduled will be on female sexual dysfunction, and that's a 2-day meeting, 1 day devoted to getting public input, or rather patient input, and the second day a scientific meeting on female sexual dysfunction. And as you can see, the other diseases there will be covered in the coming year. Now, each of these meetings has some similarity in its format. We, as Saujanya was mentioning earlier, we have panels that are structured around the 2 key areas that we want to talk about and particularly hear your perspectives on. So those are the questions around what it's like for you to live with the condition, what are the symptoms that are most impactful on you and your family, your caregivers, and then what your experience is with the treatments that you're using for the disease. We also have questions that we tailor that the review divisions may particularly want to probe and understand better while they have the opportunity, the sort of great opportunity that you're here and they can ask those questions. The other thing I'll say about these 2 areas, the severity of the disease and the what it's like to live with the disease and how well the available treatments work, are components that fit right into FDA's risk-benefit approach in looking and assessing drugs. We really need to understand the severity of the condition and the degree to which drugs meet the needs of the patient to determine the context, what we call the clinical context, in which we evaluate the benefits that are found through the clinical trials and whatever harms have been identified through the trials. It's a critical context for our decision-making around whether or not something should be approved for marketing or stay on the market. So the questions that are being probed today are essential to setting the stage for our decision-making about drugs to treat the disease. And so we're extremely happy to have you here today to help us with this. And so these outcomes of these meetings help us to identify future topics that we need to address or issues that may need to be addressed in drug development. And the participation and the level of participation and engagement that we get from you is critical and really the key to the success of this meeting. I have to keep reaching in here to find the space bar. Okay. The final thing that I want to mention is that we produce a report. After we have, in addition to the webcast and the comments that you give us today, we have a docket that we leave open for several weeks at least to try to get any other public input, information that patients may want to submit, something that you may not think of today and you want to send us later, either your own comments, something you want us to be aware of. That electronic docket is open for that purpose. And so the report that we produce tries to faithfully capture what we hear today, just the way we've heard it, in the words that the patients have used to convey that to us. Similarly, capture what we hear in the webcast, in addition to what we hear in the room, and what we might get through the docket. And those sources of information are put into the summary report. We have a series that we're calling Voice of the Patient, and that's available on our website. And it's there for your use, for our use in future work. For example, Ashley Slagle's here today. She's part of our team in the Center for Drugs that works on patient-reported outcome tools, and her group may look at ways we can further formalize developing a tool to collect this kind of information in clinical trials. So that's one way that this information could move forward and be further enriched later and be built to help us with our clinical studies in the future. And so with that, I'll end and I'll turn it over to Benu, who's going to talk about the disease.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'd like to echo the welcome that you heard from the previous panelists. I too welcome you here to White Oak today, and I really look forward to this discussion. My presentation is very brief and likely nothing that's new to anyone in this room. So I will go through quickly because I really do want to have you spend the time, spend the time hearing from you today. So as we all know in this room, IPF is a rare, chronic, and progressive interstitial lung disease of unknown etiology, affecting about 5 million patients worldwide. It affects males greater than females, and the diagnosis usually occurs between the 5th and 7th decades of life. Progression of disease is variable among individuals, and this is one of those things that makes it very difficult to study IPF. Progressive fibrosis or scarring of the lungs leads ultimately to death with a median survival of 3 to 5 years after diagnosis. The signs and symptoms are shortness of breath or dyspnea, which can occur as manifesting as rapid or shallow breathing, or also with exertion. A non-productive or dry cough is a very bothersome symptom to many patients of this disease, and I know that we'll probably hear a lot more about these today, and we look forward to hearing your characterization of these symptoms. Some patients experience gradual unintended weight loss, feeling very tired, and also a change in the shape of their fingers and toes from the lack of oxygen delivered to their body. As with many diseases, the goals for the treatment of IPF are to reduce the symptoms and signs, improve patient quality of life, slow or halt disease progression, and increase survival. We know that current therapeutic options are limited. Lung transplantation is an option for those who qualify, but there are no recommended or approved therapies specifically to treat IPF. And one of the reasons that a session like this is so important is because we have been using therapies over the past years that now, as we're studying them, and we've considered them the standard of care in the past, have actually been shown to be harmful to patients when studied in clinical trials. So we realize that even those things that were the standard of care in the past may not be helpful to patients, and hearing from you as patients is very valuable to us. There are multiple challenges in drug development with IPF. We have a small patient population. We have diverse phenotypes or disease characteristics, as I mentioned before. Different people progress through this disease differently and at different paces. So it's very difficult to study patients in a large clinical trial when everybody is so heterogeneous. And there are multiple and unanswered questions that are important here. And I have some of them listed here, but these are not likely to be all the questions. But some of them are, what signs and symptoms should be measured and how should we measure them? Do the disease symptoms progress in a time course that can be captured adequately in a clinical trial? And do biomarkers exist, certain measures that indicate disease, and do they have relevance as an endpoint in clinical trials? So for conditions like IPF, which are not fully understood, we realize that input from patients is especially important, and that's why we place such value on this session today. Patient-reported outcomes, or PROs, can represent direct measures of treatment benefit, how a patient feels or functions, and this is of utmost importance. All measurements need to be evaluated, however, in adequate and well-controlled randomized trials. So we hope to take the input that you give us today, and as Dr. Gilbert Mclean said, we don't design the clinical trials, but we do provide input to companies regarding the clinical trials. So this really helps us to guide the companies as to what kind of endpoints, what kind of patient-reported outcomes, how to develop their patient-reported outcomes. And patient input such as yours is essential to capture important and clinically relevant disease symptoms for these patient-reported outcomes. So with that, my remarks are finished. I welcome you again, and I'd like to turn the podium back over to Sujanya.
Thank you to my FDA colleagues for all of your comments. So what I'd like to do now is go over the discussion format and let you know what to expect with our upcoming discussion. As I mentioned before, this is probably very different from other public meetings you may have attended. This is more informal, it's more talk show style. Again, I want to just reiterate, please feel comfortable to take a break, get up and stretch. If you need to go and get the additional oxygen, please feel free to do those things. So we have two topics today. Topic one is on the most significant symptoms of IPF and how they impact your daily life. So what we're listening for here is what are those symptoms that really impact what you can do on a day-to-day basis? Are there certain activities that you can't do at all, or maybe not as fully as you would like because of those symptoms? Also, talk to us about how your symptoms have changed or evolved over time. And if you can, tell us what an average day looks like versus a more severe day of symptoms. The second topic is on patient perspectives and current treatment options for IPF. So here what we're listening for is what is your current treatment regimen? Is it working for you, and how do you know it's working for you? Can you point to specific examples? And on the flip side, what is not working for you? What are the downsides to those treatments? And again, give us those specific examples on what those downsides are and how you know it's not working for you. We also want to hear from you on what you're looking for in an ideal treatment. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do is first hear from a panel of patients and caregivers. And with that, could I have my topic one panelists come on up and take your seat? And if you could bring your name card with you. So I have had the privilege of working with our panelists for the last 2 weeks or so, and I can't thank you all enough for preparing these summaries and taking the time to share these stories with us, so we sincerely appreciate it. So our panel reflects a range of experiences with IPF, and they've each prepared about 5 minutes of remarks. And what we'll do after we hear from our panel is then we'll broaden the dialogue, and we will invite more patients and caregivers and patient representatives in the audience to share your experiences. And we want to hear from you, for those of you in the audience, what resonated with you? What are similar experiences that you share? And also what may be different for you? Build on what you've heard from the panel. And periodically we'll ask questions. I'll ask some follow-up questions. I'll also look to the FDA panel periodically, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. And we have mic runners around the room. Some of my FDA colleagues will be here and they'll have a microphone. And if you're comfortable to do so, just raise your hand and they'll come to you. And if you could state your first name before answering, that would be very helpful. And so we have a few other ways that we are going to learn from you today. One of those ways is that we're going to have polling questions along the way. And with that, can we have the clickers passed out? And we're going to test this out in just a bit. But the polling questions, it's a way for us at the FDA to learn more about the perspectives in the room and also those that are on the webcast. So we're going to pass out these clickers, and we will do these, we'll do an example in just a bit. And so for the in-person participants, use your clickers to respond to the questions. And for those of you joining us on the web, you can also answer the polling questions via the webcast. So the polling questions are entirely voluntary. It's not a scientific survey, but it's very beneficial for us to learn more about the perspectives in the room and on the web. We do ask that for those of you responding, that only patients and patient representatives respond, please. And as I just mentioned, we have over 100 people joining us on the web today, so thank you so much to all of you joining us on the webcast. We can't see you, but it's very important and so beneficial for us that you're here. Your voice is being heard. We will be checking in with the webcast periodically throughout the meeting, and we'll also take some time to have a few of you on the web join us by phone so you can share your experiences with us. Okay? And another critical way that we learn from you, and I believe one of my FDA colleagues mentioned this also, is that we have a public docket that will be open for 2 months after the meeting, so it'll be open until November 26th. And what this is a website. You can see it up on the slide, and you can go there for 2 months after the meeting and continue to share your experiences, continue to share additional thoughts and comments that you have. They're very, very important to us to read, and they will be summarized and incorporated into the summary report that gets published after the meeting. Anybody is welcome to comment in the open public comment, in the public docket. So please, we encourage you, and I will encourage you throughout the meeting to continue submitting your comments through the public docket. Okay? So we do have a few ground rules for the day. First and foremost, we encourage patients and caregivers to contribute to the dialogue. Caregivers, as I mentioned, and advocates are welcome too. So it's very important for us to hear as much as we can from those of you sharing these experiences, patients and caregivers and advocates. We understand and we know that there's industry here and academia and other government agencies. We sincerely appreciate that you're all here. We think this meeting will be very helpful for you too. We just ask that you stay in listening mode. Similarly, FDA is here to listen also. Our discussion is going to focus on symptoms and treatments. And these are the questions that you've all responded to. The topic questions they're very beneficial for us to hear about and to learn about. So we understand that there's many different aspects and many different factors and considerations to IPF. We're going to do our best to stay on topic, but if there are things that you'd like to share outside the scope of topic 1 or topic 2, again, we encourage you to sign up for open public comment or submit your submit additional thoughts to the public docket. The views expressed today are personal opinions, and on that note, respect for one another is paramount. And last but not least, let us know how the meeting went today. We have evaluation forms out on the registration desk, and we'll also pass them out towards the end of the meeting. And they're very important to us. It helps us to see what went well today for you and what you think we can improve on. Okay? Great. So next slide. Okay, so we're going to start off with a polling question. Does everybody have your clicker? Okay, great. All right, so, and panelists, you can, there we go. Kurt, we have you can look right on the screen up front. No problem. Okay, so let's do our first polling question. Where do you live? Press A for within the DC metro area, or B for outside the DC metro area. Okay, wow. So many of you have traveled to come here. We appreciate it so much. We know that travel is not always easy, so we appreciate the time and the effort for all of you to be here. Okay, have you ever been diagnosed as having IPF? Press A for yes or B for no. Okay, so it looks like we have a little over a third of you in the room that have been diagnosed with IPF. So we look forward to hearing all of the experiences that you have to share. Okay, next question. And so here we ask again, patients and patient representatives only. What is your age or your loved one's age? A, younger than 30. B, 31 to 40. C, 41 to 50. D, 51 to 60. E, 61 to 70. F, 71 to 80. Or G, 81 or greater. Okay, so it looks like we have a very good distribution here. The majority of you are in the 61 to 70 range, and we also have many of you between that 41 to 80 range. And let me check in with our web real quick. How do the results look?
It's a very even distribution on the web, pretty much equal in all group, with a little bit heavier towards the older population. And for the previous questions, we had about 95% outside of the DC area, as you would expect, and about 60% saying they'd received a diagnosis of IPF and 40% saying they hadn't.
Okay. Great, thank you. So we have a few more questions. Are you or is your loved one A, male, or B, female? Okay. So 2/3 of you are male in the room, and B, we have about 1/3 of you female. Okay?
And on the web, it's a even split with about 48% male and 51% female.
Okay. Okay, and this is our last question before we get to the panel. So what is the length of time since your diagnosis? A, less than 1 year ago. B, 1 to 3 years ago. C, 3 to 5 years ago, or D, more than 5 years ago. Okay, so here's what we have in the room. We have about 1/3 of you, more of a recent diagnosis, 1 to 3 years ago, and then we also have a large portion of you that have been diagnosed more than 5 years ago, and then pretty much an even split for some of the newly diagnosed less than 1 year ago, and then about 17% 3 to 5 years ago. On the web?
Very similar on the web, 17% less than 1 year, 30% 1 to 3 years, 17% again 3 to 5 years, and 35% for more than 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that will be the polling questions for now. We're going to come back to the polling questions in just a bit. But now I'd like to turn it over to our panelists to share your comments with us. And if we could go to the next slide. So it looks like we have Kurt sitting closest to me, so you'll get started, if that's okay. So what you'll do is you'll press the red button to turn your microphone on.
That's good. Can you hear me? Okay.
Great.
Put those right there. Okay.
All right.
Hi, I'm Kurt Thompson. My wife's name was Joy, and she was quite a joy. We were married 42 years, one day. She died the day after our 42nd wedding anniversary. So she's been gone a little over 4 years, and we had 3 children, 5 grandchildren. She was the mother. She had an identical twin sister who also died of pulmonary fibrosis at the age of 48. And I'm going to pretty much keep my remarks to my wife, but if you have some questions, because they were very much identical twins. And I say that, and you'll see me grin a little bit. The first month I met them, I think I may have had a date with her sister one time, but I'm never real sure about that, and they never would tell me. But I promise you, years later, it was not hard to tell the difference. So she was 62 years old when she died. She was diagnosed in July of 2005. She lived 4.5 years, and she died on July 20th of 2010. We're from Jackson, Mississippi. Now, that word usually will bring out the rogue. Can you tell I'm from Mississippi? We were referred to the University of Alabama at Birmingham. There was a lot of research being done there on pulmonary fibrosis. Very few people in Jackson, Mississippi even knew what it was. Joy participated in 3 different studies at UAB, 3 different drug studies. She was in the pirfenidone study, which we're going to talk about some today. So that was the last study she was in. And we never knew, of course, being in studies, you don't know whether you're on the placebo or the real medication. So we never knew. Hold on, I have prepared notes. I'm not used to working from prepared notes, but I was working against a time deadline here, so I'm trying to stay on topic. The first thing I remember about her, and the first thing I noticed that started the process was the cough. The cough. It just starts. It's kind of like a dry cough. It goes. Of course, her sister had it. It's not like we'd never heard that before. About a year or so, it got more intense. She couldn't catch her breath. She couldn't stop coughing. Her clothes would just be soaking wet. She would sweat. The fatigue. It was just, it just built over a period of years. It's just one of those things you watch. The doctor was very, very helpful to us. I feel like I'm switching gears here, but I'm going to talk some about her cough medicine. I made a D in chemistry, y'all, so I'm a business major, so if I butcher this name, but there's a very good cough medicine that helped that cough, and it's Tussionex. I could walk into a drugstore and tell them I wanted Tussionex. And it's called Penkinetic, but if there's a doctor here that knows how to pronounce it properly, I'm always welcome to be corrected. It would help her cough, and as things progressed, she would take that, and then like in intervals between that, she would take an over-the-counter cough medicine. That's what she took to help her stop coughing. And the side effects of that's the part I'm trying to get at, is with that much cough medicine, with that much codeine, she had a lot of side symptoms. And I'm also was a business major. I need to tell you this. One 8-ounce bottle of the Tussionex cost about $380. It's not covered by insurance. And her last year, she took 2 bottles. So that was about $900 a month, close to $9,000 a year. It is not covered under Medicare. She was eventually under Medicare, and it's just not a covered cost. So we were fortunate that we could afford that. I took an early retirement to take care of her. I took an early retirement to spend time with her, but she was about halfway into the illness. She had to go onto oxygen. That limits what you can do. Flying is there are portable oxygen machines, but for her, they would not produce the per liter amount that she needed. We pretty much depended on the one we got from the oxygen company and the bottles. I would always have a trunk full of bottles. I always had the big bottles, the little bottles, and I had the machine with me. I was known to just haul it with me wherever I went. But the side effects of that, she had acid reflux. I'm not trying to be graphic, but She was very constipated. She had headaches, joint pain, weight gain, and the fatigue. Then she was depressed. There's a lot to say about the identical twin sisters. If I had time, I could tell you a story about it, but they were very much shared a lot of emotions and knew a lot about each other. So she was very depressed when her sister died. And of course, there's just, when you meet the doctor and talk to him, there's just not a lot of things to look forward to. I would be wandering around a drugstore sometimes at midnight looking for things like enemas and cough medicine and cough drops and everything. I mean, you just forget everything. You do what you got to do. You do what you got to do. And she took so much medicine. I mean, we tried to manage it. We tried to stock it. One day I walked in the kitchen and she was crying. And I looked and there was that medicine laying on the counter. And she just swooped her hand and knocked it over. And she was just crying because it was so hard to get. It was just so hard. So it's just one of those little side things I wanted to mention to you. In our house, the doctor recommended that we make the environment as clean as possible for air. So I got down and I got me a razor cutter and I cut every piece of carpet in the house out. And I installed a laminate floor. I must say, if you didn't know where the mistakes were, you won't find them. They're behind the doors and in the closets. But I got that sucker down. And so we have all laminate. There's no carpet anywhere. And we did that. She also, when she slept at night, she had an overhead fan. She had a fan by her head. She had 2 oscillating fans, and we had a window air conditioning unit. So the air was moving. I mean, it just was something to help. It was some psychological. It was some helped her breathe better. And we did it. And we painted the room real dark. We put dark curtains in it because when she wanted to sleep, she slept. I had a housekeeper. I'm not a real good housekeeper, but I do pretty good. Not a real good cook, but I do all right. You can look at me and tell I don't, well, I eat out a lot. I just go ahead and tell you the truth and get that over with. The progression, that last study though, the pirfenidone, the doctor and I had this conversation one day where he told me, he said, I have no way of knowing whether she's on the placebo or the real thing. He said, but I can see, I feel, I sense some improvement going here. He said, it's not going away. It's not going to ever go away. But he said she's holding her own for a little while here. So she would kind of come and go. I'm going to tell you something there that she did, because in this process, about the 3rd year, we started talking to the transplant unit at University of Alabama at Birmingham. We had a number of visits with them. And they did not want to transplant her lungs until they had deteriorated to a point. As the doctor put it, you're swapping one set of issues with another set of issues. So her lungs, her lung capacity was holding pretty well. We were pushing it, we were pushing it, we were pushing it. This is no lie. They told her to go home. This is in the 3rd year now, so her progression was pretty bad. Told her that she needed to get her weight to height limit and shape. She needed to get it in as good a physical shape as she could get. She lost 30 pounds in 6 months. She went to aerobics. She went to aerobics at a church by our house, and the people couldn't believe it when she walked in there with that oxygen bottle and that cannula hooked up. And she was an athlete in high school. She played basketball and ran track. So she was a very athletic person. And she would get up there and do the aerobics for about 6 or 7 months. And we talked back and forth with the transplant unit, and it just never happened. We just ran out of time. One other thing I would tell you about the oxygen machine. We didn't go anywhere without that machine. I mean, I lived in Jackson, Mississippi. Birmingham, Alabama is about a 4-hour drive. I counted, and over a 5-year period, we probably drove almost 100 times back and forth. That's a lot of time. Some days we would make the trip. She'd have tests. We'd come home. She'd sleep. She'd sleep over. She'd sleep coming back. We'd use oxygen bottles for that. The guys at the hotel, after a while, we stayed at the hotel when we knew we'd be there long enough for more testing. A couple of guys there that do more about oxygen machines than the oxygen company. I could pull in. It looked like a pit crew coming out for a NASCAR race. Up go the trunk. Out would come the oxygen machine. Out would come all our clothes. And before I could check in and get to the room, they had the machine running. They had a 50-foot cannula and cord running, and she was ready to go. And my wife was a hugging, kissing person. And she hugged them all, and every time we'd leave, she'd hug them all. And I got hugged, and normally you wouldn't see me in a white shirt. There'd usually be a lipstick somewhere because I was going to get a kiss every morning before I went to work. So she was just that type of person.
Thank you,
But,
Curtis. Do you have any other final remarks?
That's enough. I'll pass it on.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have Faye next.
Hi, I'm Faye McInnes. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Actually, myself and my husband were diagnosed with two very deadly diseases the summer of 2012. My husband, Phil, was diagnosed in June with IPF, and I was diagnosed in July with breast cancer. We were both, it was a scary diagnosis. Obviously, 40,000 people die a year from IPF and breast cancer. So we knew we were in serious trouble. However, what I want to bring to, part of what I want to bring to light is the fact that from that moment on, from the diagnosis, we had two entirely different experiences. We were at the two opposite ends of the spectrum. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer, my doctor held my hand and said everything was going to be fine. I was going to be okay. She told me I would have a team of doctors. She would be my surgeon, I'd have a radiation oncologist, and then I would have a medical oncologist. After she left the room, talking to me a couple minutes, her physician assistant came in. She sat down, she handed me this binder. It's called My Personal Treatment Journey. And inside it already came with a bunch of business cards from people that are associated in the medical community with this disease. All throughout this book, it ranges anywhere from the Financial Navigator Program, nutrition, body, mind, spirit wellness, nurse navigator support, pain and symptom management, pastoral care, psychological counseling, social worker, all of it right in here. You kept with you, you took it to all your appointments, to everything. When Phil was given his diagnosis by the local pulmonologist, he was given 4 sheets of paper. The first 2 just described pulmonary nodule. The last 2 sheets are the only thing that talked about IPF, and all it gave him were some of the diagnosis about it, some of the causes, treatment, which was there was no treatment. The doctor said, I can't do anything for you. You need to go to a specialist, either, we live in Delaware, so either a Temple or a Penn or Johns Hopkins. The pulmonologist told him, pick one. So he picked Temple. Talking to a couple of his other doctors, they thought Temple might be good. So he made a phone call in June, and of course the first appointment he could get was in September, 3 months later. So during the summer of 2012, I ended up having surgery, a lumpectomy, in August. Then I had to go back, a little more tissue had to be taken out. That was done in September. In October, I had radiation. In November, I was put on cancer medication, tamoxifen. So by November, I was cancer-free. I had finished my surgery, my radiation, and I was on medication that I would have to stay on for several years. During the summer of 2012 for Phil, he waited. There was no treatment. The pulmonologist didn't tell him anything about anything. So he went about most of his regular activities, although whenever he would mow the grass, I would look out, and it was a push mower, and I'd see him stopped with his hand on it, breathing, trying to breathe, and he looked all white and pasty, and I kept thinking he was going to pass out. And I would talk to him, and of course he was a man, so he explained to me, no, I'm fine, it's just really hot out. I should have mowed the grass earlier in the morning. And that's how it always was. We would always ride bikes. Well, when we rode our bike, he always was faster than me. He in previous years would be in different cycling events. One was Bike to the Bay in Delaware, 75 miles each way. No problem, he could do that. He would ride 50-mile biking events. So this summer we go out and we ride in our neighborhood and go around, and I'm beating him. Well, I thought it was kind of funny at first, but then it wasn't funny. Then we went out a second time and I realized he really can't breathe. And then that's when I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's really when I threw a fit and actually made him go to the doctor, to the local pulmonologist, which is how he got his diagnosis. For me, I got my diagnosis through an annual mammogram. That's how I ended up at the doctor. But for him, it actually took me noticing him that he couldn't do things as well as he did before. Again, he downplayed it. He didn't tell me what pulmonary fibrosis was. I unfortunately did not go on the internet and look. I just took him at his word, and he just said, oh no, it's no problem, some problems with my lung, it'll be taken care of. So I watched him during the summer and realized he always made excuses so we didn't go bike riding. I watched him when he mowed the lawn and had trouble getting through that. He was still able to go to work. He still did projects around the house. He was a little bit slower with it, but he always had an excuse for why he was that way. So since I was out for surgery for breast cancer, I was able to go with him in September to Temple to see the pulmonologist there. And through discussions with her, she felt that he should go on oxygen with exertion, but he wouldn't need it at any other time. She was very friendly. He was very friendly. My husband, talking, everything seemed okay. I got no red flags. Okay, so he needs oxygen to help him until they work on this, and everything was fine. She said, you want to come back November because you had your pulmonology test, breathing test in June with your other doctor. We want to do a 6-month test. Okay, that's fine. We continue on then during the fall, and then I noticed that, you know, he still had more trouble, but he was still doing okay. And then we went back in just a couple months later in November. They did more tests, and then she told him he had lost 10% of his lung capacity in the 6 months. And then she said to him, you have to go from the test results, you have to be on oxygen all the time, even when you're sleeping. So 24/7. So even from September somehow to the end of November, he went from just needing oxygen from exertion to all the time. And then that's when I started to really see a difference in him. That's when he, going up the steps, that's when he would have his, even with his oxygen, he would take one step and then have to rest and breathe, take another step and breathe. So instead of running up the steps or even walking up the steps, it now became a 20-minute ordeal just for him to get upstairs and to get into bed. Getting dressed in the morning, that became an hour-and-a-half struggle because it took him so long to walk to the closet to get the clothes. Then he had to sit down. Then he'd have to rest after each piece of article that he put on. In January, at that point, he had to quit work. It was just really too difficult for him for all the transportation. Also in January, that's when he stopped driving. I needed to drive him wherever we were going. So I took him to all his doctor's appointments and to other things. Getting back to the oxygen, that's back in September when we got the oxygen. Our whole lives became wrapped around that. We couldn't take a trip, go to the doctors. We couldn't go to visit family. We couldn't take a day trip anywhere without making sure we had enough oxygen to be there. The worst thing to happen would be to be stuck and not have oxygen. He could end up at the emergency room, passing out, maybe even die. That was an extremely scary, frightening time. I was always so scared we were going to go someplace and he was going to run out of oxygen. In January then, that's when, and also too, when we would go to doctor's appointments, they didn't have oxygen refills there. They didn't have any, you had to bring everything with you. No one else is set up for this if you have this disease. The only place is when you went to the pulmonologist where they would have facilities there to take care of you. Nothing else, no public buildings, no place else, nothing can help you if you need oxygen. Finally, I noticed when we went back and saw her in December when she put him on oxygen all the time, she said, it's actually my husband, again, very, very casually, and he sort of whispered to her, do you think it's time we should start talking about lung transplants? And that, quite honestly, was the first time that lung transplant? Wait, what's going on here? I was so clueless. I'm ashamed of myself at this point, but I was so clueless about this. And she said, yeah, that will be some treatment maybe further down the line. And then I looked at her and I said, well, what do you mean lung transplant? Isn't this going to be fixed? Doesn't this get better? And she said, well, no, but most people last 2 to 3 years after they're diagnosed. And my jaw dropped and I said, you're talking death? I mean, I had no idea, and I was just stunned silent. They're still happy with each other, talking back and forth. Doesn't seem to be any urgency. Bill and I don't talk because it's hard to say anything. You don't know what to say. We're driving back home in the car, And then tears. I don't sob, but tears start coming out of my eyes. And he looks at me and he smiles. He says, "Now, Faye," he says, "I'm not going to bring you on any more doctor's appointments if you start to cry." And I said, "I promise I won't cry. I promise." And from that point onward, then I went home and actually looked it up on the internet and found a lot of things out I didn't want to know. So I really was scared from that point forward. And then that causes some friction because he would have a pulsometer, and I would always be asking what his readings were, make sure they were at 90 or more. Until finally at one point after this, he said, "Faye, you've asked me 3 times in the last 10 minutes. And I started to cry, and I said, "Well, I just want to make sure that you're okay." And I started crying, and he said, "Faye," he said, "I'm so sorry." He said, "I know you're really scared, and I'm sorry I've made you scared." And that's really pretty much how we lived. And in January, he was told that he should try to get a biopsy to get into a clinical trial. So they made an appointment. And in January, we saw the doctor, Temple, everything was good. It was set up for February 19th, but he really wasn't doing very well. It was more difficult for him to get around. As I said, difficult to go up the stairs. He really couldn't work. He couldn't drive. And I just noticed he was, on a bad night, he couldn't even make it all in one trip. He'd get up from the armchair, have to sit down in a chair in the kitchen, then make it to the stairs, then get up to the landing, then sit down for a couple minutes, then make it the rest of the way up. So called the doctor, and we went in to saw her on February 12th. And she said, "No, it's too risky for you to have this operation." So they stopped the operation for the lung biopsy. And she said, "You need to start being tested for lung transplant." Unfortunately, he had Aetna, but we found out at that last point that they covered for management of IPF, but not for lung transplant. So all the time being with the Temple doctor meant nothing. He couldn't get a lung transplant there, get testing or. So then she said, "Well, Penn has a good, let me call there." Well, that was 5 weeks later, so he would get an appointment to see them. Unfortunately, 10 days later, on February 28th at 3 in the morning, Phil couldn't breathe at all. I had to he went to the bathroom, and from that point on, I had to carry him out of the bathroom into the bed. And I called 911, and they came, and they had to have 4 men put him on a stretcher and carry him out. And they had to actually put him on a ventilator. They had to sedate him and actually paralyze him. But they told me he probably wouldn't survive the night, but he did. He's a fighter, and he did. And he spent 30 days on a ventilator, believing that we could get him in for testing for a lung transplant. And he hung onto that.
I know this is hard, Faye. I'm so sorry.
Am I out of time?
Any final remarks?
Just that on March 28th at 3 a.m., he died. Up until that last moment, he thought that there was still hope, but there wasn't. And maybe with drugs that are coming out, they would have given him more time, that he might have been able to get tested because he was a good candidate for a lung transplant, but he wasn't. So now he's not here, and all I have left are memories and pictures and his wedding band on my necklace. And I hope drugs do come out that help, that give people more time, and they might have a chance. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you, Faye. Okay, next we have Diane.
That's something to follow up, huh? Okay. Hi, my name is Diane Reichert, and I am living with Idiopathic Pulmonary Fibrosis, also known as IPF. And I'd like to thank my husband, Kurt, for walking this journey with me. In August of 2013, at the age of 48, I was diagnosed with IPF. This past year has been an express train to a multitude of life-changing decisions with no time to think, to plan, or prepare. The symptoms I think that affect me the most are shortness of breath, fatigue, and I get pain in my fingers, the tips of my fingers, my toes, my lips, and my tongue. Not everybody has that, but I do, unfortunately. Early on in my diagnosis, I only needed oxygen to sleep at night and possibly to walk my dog, and that would be at 2 liters. Fast forward to where we are right now. I am on 4 liters continuous flow, and it's increasing quickly, and this is just within a year of diagnosis. Although I experienced shortness of breath initially at diagnosis, it's easy to blow off because, you know, you're getting older, you're overweight, out of shape, those types of things. But as time passed, my shortness of breath increased, and my need for supplemental oxygen increased as well. And along with the increase in supplemental oxygen or the shortness of breath, the fatigue really weighs on you. Your body works so hard to be able to process the oxygen that you breathe in that you're completely exhausted. It required me at the age of 49 to take an early retirement from a profession that I had done forever. I was a school teacher and then became a learning consultant, which is someone who diagnoses or tests students to see if they're eligible or continue to be eligible for special education services. I spent a great deal of time working with emotionally disturbed children, so this was a huge shock for them. I loved horseback riding. It was my peace, and I had to give that up. It's extremely difficult to groom a horse and prepare a horse to get on him to ride him, let alone to actually be able to sit on him and get him to move in any direction. Believe it or not, it's a lot of cardio work that I never thought of. I just couldn't figure out why I couldn't breathe doing it. I'm a hobby photographer. I'm not able to do that so much anymore for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of times my fingers hurt too much to push down on the shutter, believe it or not. And I also have a great deal of difficulty walking, lugging the oxygen, lugging the camera, going anywhere to be able to take pictures. It would be great if the scenes would come to me, but they don't. So I don't really do that too much anymore. It's difficult to keep my house clean. Even with the oxygen, I get very tired. So it's sweep the floor, sit down and rest for a long time. Then maybe do something else and sit down and rest. Laundry takes days to do, not just one day. The beach. This is the first time, this summer was the first time in all the years that I've been alive on this earth that I've not been to the beach. I am a beach girl. I can't go to the beach now. I can't walk in the sand. I can't go in the water. I could sit on the boardwalk, but that's not what a beach girl does. And I didn't realize that until the end of the summer that I had not been. On my very best days, I struggle to have a good long conversation with my friends, hang out with my family. It's difficult. It's hard to talk. It's hard to talk and be able to breathe, and it makes you very tired. Shopping is hard. Dana let me borrow the oxygen. I have a concentrator. So you always have to worry about running out of battery charge or run out of oxygen in your tank. So everything is planned. Well, I like to shop. You can't really shop now. On my worst days, and this morning was a rougher morning, coughing will wipe you out for an entire day. Wake up in the morning and cough so hard that you may actually throw up in your mouth. And I'm sorry to say that, but it's the truth. And it just literally wipes you out. Physically, you're exhausted. And if that's not bad enough, now you have to get up and take a shower. And then rest. And then dry yourself off and rest, because you can't get out of the shower and dry yourself off. You have to rest in between. Everything is do a little bit and rest. So like you said, it's about an hour and a half to 2 hour production from the time you get up in the morning till the time you look as cute as I look right now. So it's difficult. It's very difficult. The headaches, I get severe headaches that cause me to just lay on the couch. And again, the pain in my fingers and toes are just tremendous. Ideally for me, what I would like to see is a medication to slow the progress of this disease, eventually make it so people don't get this disease at all. Unfortunately for me, my disease has progressed to the point where I probably won't reap the benefits of this drug or any drug. However, I want it for my PF warrior friends, my people that live with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis every single day and know how hard it is to breathe, know how hard it is to get up in the morning and keep a smile on your face and to keep going. I just want them to be able to live a good, healthy quality of life with slowed progression of this disease, if that's at all possible.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you. Okay, and then we have Laura.
Really, it's my turn? Can you hear me? I want you to see that I've had to do something that I normally never do unless I had idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And that's to set up my little station here with cough drops, with water. Because of Diane, I have Kleenex. And this little thing, which is called a POC, or a portable oxygen concentrator, for those of you that probably have never seen one and see the little Miss Maxine tanks that are behind us. It's very difficult still, it's getting better, but it's very difficult to be first diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. In 2006, I was diagnosed with scarring, and I used to get pneumonia all the time, so I had gone to the pulmonary doctor to find out why. That just didn't seem right. And he diagnosed me with scarring. He said, but don't worry about it. It's just scarring. So come see me in 2 years. So I went to see him in 2 years, and he said, you still have scarring, don't worry about it. It could have been, I'm a baby boomer, so my parents were older than that. So, you know, they were exposed to certain environmental things such as asbestos, which I was exposed to as a child because my father would bring it home. So, you know, the doctor didn't know that maybe that might be the cause of my scarring in my lungs. And fast forward to 2012, when he took another CAT scan, he said, oops, it moved. But don't worry about it. But don't worry about it. I can't cry. If I cry, I'll start coughing. That's one of my major symptoms that are really bad, other than my shortness of breath. And I'm holding this because I'm trying to do this without my oxygen. So he still said, don't worry about it. I tried and I was a power walker. Thanks to prednisone, I've gained 40 pounds, so it's a little bit harder to do, but with the oxygen. But I was a power walker. I would do that all the time on my lunch hour. In the winter, instead of power walking outside at lunch, and I live in Hartford, Connecticut, and so we would go across the river to power walk. And we decided that we would try to compete against each other, and we walked 15 to 22 flights of stairs at lunch instead of power walking in the middle of the winter. And I started coughing, and I couldn't stop. So I finally went and found another pulmonary doctor who did a VATS biopsy on me. And with the VATS biopsy, he said, you have a thing called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. There's no treatment and there's no cure, but don't worry about it. I'll take care of you. So I said, that's not going to happen. And I went out onto the internet and I found certain sites, Patients Like Me was one of them, that people out there who had IPF said, don't settle for that. Go to a center of excellence, which I did do. I went to Yale, New Haven. And Yale sent me on to my journey, which brought me to transplant evaluation at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And also I'm now going for evaluation at Columbia so that I can hopefully, when the time comes, be transplanted into either center, one of the two regions. One of the things that I loved my job and I can no longer work. I would go to work and I would cough so badly that there was another person in the office who would sit there and be able to gauge how my day was going because it depended on how much I coughed. And so I would bring a a washcloth to work with me so that I could muffle the sounds of my cough so that I wasn't bothering other people. Because it would always be known that Laura was coughing an awful lot today, so it had to be a bad day for her today. This wonderful thing, this portable concentrator, I also had at the time. I'm now back to tanks, but I had this portable concentrator, and Hartford is like this area. I would take a bus to work. You know, I know a lot of you who live here probably take trains, and so in the middle of the winter, this thing doesn't have four-wheel drive on it. So I couldn't put it in the middle of the snow and try to get it to move. So I'd be in the middle of the street at 5 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the dark, hoping that a car wasn't coming so I could get myself to that bus stop in order to get on the bus. Not only that, but there has to be sleeves made for these little pieces of plastic, because once I got to the bus stop, I'd have to then try to warm it up because it froze solid. So I'd have to try to warm it up in order to use the oxygen in order to get to work. And that's just the little things that happen, you know. It's a very lonely disease. It's a very lonely place to be because it is terminal. There's only one treatment currently out there, and that one treatment is a lung transplant. That's hard to take. It's hard to take. And if I talk about it, my daughter tells me I'm being negative, and so don't my friends. And if I don't talk about it, then I'm inside myself, and what's the matter with you, you know? It's hard. It's very difficult. But hopefully we'll come out with something. I'm currently in a clinical trial. There's more clinical trials coming out. There's 2 that currently are here at the FDA, that hopefully those drugs will come out that have been promising in stopping the process. And that's about all I can do. They say that it's very rare. It's not as rare as everyone thinks. My godchild's mother has the same disease. And I'm in a clinical trial because I don't want my daughter to have to sit here someday like Diane is, because her mother had it. I don't want my daughter to have to do that and say what her name is and that she has idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and there's no cure, no treatment. So I think I'm up, right? Yes.
Thank you,
hopefully,
Laura.
so I don't have to sit here and cry anymore. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you. I would like to ask, can we give our panelists a round of applause? It takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to sit up here and share such personal experiences, and we can't thank you enough. Thank you for sharing Joy's story and for Phil's story, and Diane and Laura, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. All right, thank you. Yeah, you can stay up there. Stay up there. You're not off the hook yet. Okay. So I want to quickly recap some of the points that we heard. And if you're comfortable to do so, I want to do a quick show of hands to see how their experiences resonate with your experiences. So we heard Kurt share about his wife's dry cough, a cough that would make her so sweaty because it was so intense. Could we do a show of hands to see, do others experience that? Okay. So we have quite a few hands raised, about 5 or 6 hands. Okay. We also heard shortness of breath. Faye mentioned that her husband would be so short of breath that he would be white and pasty, as you said. Shortness of breath to that intense level. Can we do a show of hands to see how many that resonated with? Okay, I see about 8 or 10 hands raised. Okay. And then we heard about, Diane was sharing about the pain in the fingers and toes and lips. How many of you also experienced that? Okay. Well, you're not alone. That's right. You are not alone. Yep. Okay. And then Laura mentioned quite a few of the impacts of living with IPF. So she mentioned she enjoyed shopping and traveling. So how many of you did that resonate with, that it impacts some of the hobbies and activities that you really enjoy doing that are now limited? Quite a few hands. Quite a few hands. So I think what that shows is that your experiences resonated so much with those of you in the audience, and that you're not alone. So thank you for sharing those experiences with us. So let's get our clickers out. We're going to do another polling question. And those of you on the panel, you make sure you have your clickers ready too. Okay, so this one says, of all the symptoms you have experienced because of IPF, which do you consider to have the most significant impact on your daily life? And you can choose up to 3 symptoms. Shortness of breath, B, fatigue or malaise, C, coughing, especially dry or hacking coughs, D, chest pain, E, gradual unintended weight loss, F, decreased appetite, G, clubbing, H, depression, or I, other symptoms not mentioned. So take a few moments to put in your responses. Right. And again, the polling questions are for patients, caregivers, patient representatives, so make sure you respond on behalf of your loved one. Okay, so it looks like shortness of breath is the most prevalent or most significant symptom for the majority of you in the room, followed by coughing and then fatigue. And then it looks like we also had depression come up. And then a small percentage of some of the other symptoms mentioned. So shortness of breath, coughing, and fatigue were the top 3 symptoms. And could we see what the results were on the web?
On the web was very similar. We had about 60% shortness of breath, and we had 50% fatigue and 50% coughing, and then 14% depression.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so with that, I'd like to now open it up to other patients and caregivers in the audience. Let's start with shortness of breath. And would anybody like to share how you or your loved one experienced the shortness of breath? Yes. And hang on, just one second. We'll have a microphone come over to you.
My name is Martina Coates Nance, and I'm representing my husband today. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here because for some strange reason we think my daughter brought it home, but he got a cold. So to talk about the cough, I mean, it is that cough where he literally is like to the point of almost throwing up. The shortness of breath affects everything, as you know, we commented on the questions there, but he can't do anything. I mean, Douglas was a biker. He played tennis. I mean, he could throw a football field length. So it affects everything. To go up the stairs, he goes up the stairs. I remember Faye talking about, you know, husband going upstairs. It's like, okay, you get to the top of the steps, you have to stop, pause. And what I didn't know and what I've learned is that, you know, sometimes we don't even realize it. We hold our breath going up the steps and having to learn to remember to breathe as you're doing different activities. So that's, like I said, it's impacted us so much. Kurt talked about, you know, that having that 50-foot cord, and others have talked about we don't travel. The last time we actually did take a trip was to go to California to his father's funeral, and yes, on the plane with portable oxygen, he ran out of oxygen. We're in the air. He ran out of oxygen. So as soon as we touched down, it's like we had to call. We're getting ready to touch down. Somebody needs to be at the airport with a tank. The TSA guy would not let his brother get his tank to him. I'm like, if you don't let his tank get to him, he literally will die on you right here. So it isn't, you know, it's your life. Having those tanks with you all the time. As I mentioned to the folks here at the table, you know, you plan a trip based upon how much oxygen you have. You have to figure in that, you know, okay, where do we have to go? How long is it going to take to get there? Right now he's at rest, 4 liters. At exertion, it could be anywhere from 6 to 8. So it's like, okay, get there, and you're sitting right here. You can't move too much. How long are we going to be here to make sure we have air to get back home? So yeah, that shortness of breath, it literally is a matter of life and death.
Thank you, Martina. Anyone else want to share? Yes.
My name is Bill Boyer. Fortunately, I was able to retire from USDA, one of your sister agencies, on January 1st. And I like traveling, so in May I took my sister to visit friends in France that we've visited many times. My condition at that point was I needed oxygen for exertion and not really for sleeping or sitting and things like that, so I took a concentrator with me. I had a little cold before I left, had a little bit of a rattle, and by the time I got there, you know, almost a day and a half, almost 2 days of travel by plane and train and stations and train and stations, I was pretty worn out. So that night, I went to bed early, and I didn't have my oxygen with me or turned on because I was sleeping, and had a little coughing spell and got out of breath, got shortness of breath, and everybody else was asleep when I had this happen. So I went down, hooked up the machine, and said, got my breath again, and I said, I got to take this up to bed. So I went back upstairs, got the extra tubing, plugged that in, went back upstairs, got back in bed, and thought I was going to die. I mean, at that point, I came up with 2 conclusions. One was having IPF and needing oxygen is like being in jail. You're really boxed in by having that oxygen need, you know, having to always think about where it is, what you're doing, what you're about to do. And the other thing was, it took me a while to calm down, but at that moment when it was the worst panic of part of the moment, I suddenly knew what it was like to drown. Because I pulled out my oximeter at that point and I was at 59%. And I was scared to death. So all I could do was just lay there and keep saying relax and breathe and relax and breathe, and somehow I got through it. But then I spent the next 13 days in the hospital with antibiotics because it actually became a lung infection. So that's the shortness of breath story for me. Thanks.
Bill, thank you. And I'm not sure if you saw while you were speaking, but there were several heads nodding as you talked about some of the restrictions and the constraints that you felt. Thank you. Would anybody else like to share how they experience shortness of breath, maybe on an average day versus a more severe day? Yes?
Hi, my name is Heather Snyder. I'm a post-transplant. I received a transplant, so I'm going to tell you a story about a couple years ago. But a lot of people will describe this disease as having an elephant on your chest. I'm not sure why I never felt like I had an elephant on my chest. What I did feel was a very tight noose around my neck. To climb one step, it felt like I was hanging myself. It was extremely difficult, and I kept scratching at my throat, trying to pull that invisible noose off, but it just never came off.
Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Okay, and FDA panel, do you have any questions to follow up on the shortness of breath? Okay, great. And let's check in with the web to see what comments are coming in.
Many people are writing in to talk about shortness of breath. Most of the perspectives are very similar to what we've been hearing in the room. There's also been several people talking about coughing, including one person talking about how severe coughing led to hearing loss in one ear, and another person who said that instead of dry or hacking cough, he has more of a problem with producive cough, or a cough with thick and sticky mucus stuck in his throat, resulting in hacking and spitting and things like that. And then finally, we had one person mention her father, who had difficulty with shortness of breath after minimal exertion, hypoxia after coughing attacks, and also pulmonary hypertension and ulcers.
Thank you, Graham. So I think that can take us to the next symptom that received a large response, which was coughing. So I hear that, from all that you've shared, that the shortness of breath can also sort of result from that coughing spell that you've had. So would anybody like to share that experience with that coughing, that intense coughing or dry cough? How do you experience it? Heather?
I remember I had a dry cough for years before I was really officially diagnosed, and it sounded like a sneeze. So I would have people say, "God bless you," all the time, and I'm like, that was really a cough. But after a couple of years, I just gave up and let them think whatever they wanted to think. But I also remember my cough was really so deep that it felt like I broke my ribs, and my ribs became so cramped that I couldn't even twist. So it caused a problem driving because you really can't twist to see over your shoulder to see who's beside you. And it's kind of scary because it's like a Charlie horse almost type thing in your rib cage. And when I used to get that, I had problems breathing because I was having an anxiety attack on top of that. So that was really hard for me.
Thank you, Heather. Any other comments that you'd like to share? Yes, up here.
I'm Sam Bolger, and I just want to comment on the coughing because to me, when it came, it was so different. I remember exactly when it happened. We had gotten off a ship, and it was the day we got off, and I was embarrassed on the airplane going home because I was coughing so much. And but in reality, it was probably an early wake-up call because I tried home remedies for a couple of months. Finally, this is December, and in March I went to see my doctor. He had a chest X-ray, and he said, "This is a little interstitial stuff in there," and it put me on an antibiotic, which of course it wasn't anything that needed an antibiotic. But then a month later, I had a CAT scan done, and it agreed with the chest X-ray. But I went to a pulmonologist. I live in Denver, and I've been dealing with National Jewish, and my doctor had worked there, and he put me on this Pharmanac. And to me, it's been a wonder drug, and it's just an over-the-counter thing. And I mean, the cough went away. And the other major side effect I had was unintended weight loss. And so I'd lost about 12 pounds. And but those are the two big things. And I've gone into a couple of research things at National Jewish, and I'm not saying that I've got this thing under control or anything, but it seems like I'm still in the early stages, and actually my lung capacity have improved. This has been a year and a half since the diagnosis, so I'm just wondering. I haven't heard that mentioned, Pharmanac, but it's just an over-the-counter drug, and to me, it's been a wonder drug so far.
Thank you, Sam. I do remember, I think it was, let's see, was it Diane? You had talked about how the coughing was more intense in the morning. You said you would have that morning cough, which would kind of make the rest of the day, it kind of shaped your day almost. And I'm curious if others have a similar experience of, is there a time of day, or is there any sort of pattern to that cough? Is there times when it's worse than other times during the day? Does anybody want to? Yep. Oh, hang on one second. We're getting the.
Hi, my name is Peter van den Assen. For me, it depends on the weather.
Okay.
Barometric pressure, moisture in the air, wind, dust in the air. Basically, that's it. I do have it in the morning, but I inhale NEC, and that clears it up usually for the whole day. But then again, if it's moist outside, hot, high temperatures, yeah, that's when it hits me.
Okay.
And I got diagnosed by a regular doctor, and he said, after a regular checkup, and he says, like, do you cough a lot? And I go like, no. And he says, well, the fact that you do and you don't know that you're doing it makes me wonder, take off your shirt again. And that became an X-ray, that became a CT scan, pulmonologist. So. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So weather-triggered cough, okay? Yes?
Bill again. Mine comes with exertion, and there's obvious exertions like walking up a flight of stairs. I forget, I turn my oxygen up when I go upstairs, but instead of going slowly or maybe even stopping, I just walk right up like I used to always do, and I'm so used to just having this on my nose all the time, I forget about it sometimes. And I get up at the top, and a minute later, I'm going, oh my God, and I start coughing. And so there's obvious things like that, exertion. But I think there's little exertions too. Putting your clothes on, bending over and tying your shoes, fixing something in the kitchen, moving around that you don't really think about, that in itself is a level exertion, and all of a sudden I'm coughing. And that coughing seems to come, for me, anytime, in those circumstances, from the chest, the lungs, I suppose, pulling for oxygen. There's a tightness in the chest, and that the lung and the heart are working hard to try to get more oxygen in there. So there are little exertions a lot of times that you don't even think about that trigger that cough. And sometimes if you're not having a good day, or maybe there's more phlegm in your throat than you realized, or tickle in there than you realized, you can be coughing for minutes, feeling like you're going to throw your guts up, But it's exertion, certainly.
Thank you, Bill. So some of the triggers we've heard are weather, exertions, little exertions, in addition to maybe something more intensive. Any other thoughts? Yes. Right up here.
Sometimes when Sam coughs, something is caught in his throat. However, it seems like forever before the cough ends. It's like he's unable to finish with one cough, and it's quite scary.
Thank you, Jean. And, yep, we have one more.
I got one last one, laughing. And that's a very serious thing, because if you have two boys who are very funny, you can't laugh because then you start to cough. So they don't tell jokes anymore.
And it looks like we have one more comment.
My name is Philip, and I would say this is for people who haven't been diagnosed with IPF and don't have it. If you have that unexplained cough for about 10 years, you should really get it checked out.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, so do we have any more comments on the coughing? Okay, so let's move on to the next symptom that we heard, which is the fatigue. So would somebody like to share what the fatigue looks like to you on a day-to-day basis? And what do you do to sort of, manage the fatigue? So we have a few hands raised here.
My name is Talina, and I took care of my mom. She was always very active and, was always up doing something, didn't really spend a lot of time sitting down. The biggest thing that she noticed with the fatigue And when she noticed it was that she would sit down and immediately fall asleep. She could not stay awake. So for her, it was very difficult to manage because when you're in late stage pulmonary fibrosis, you can't stay up all the time. So you have to, you have to try to weigh that. So she ended up spending a lot of time sleeping, which she didn't like. The other thing that she talked about with regard to fatigue is that her legs always felt like jello. It wasn't that she was physically tired or tired from lack of sleep, it was that she just couldn't move. And it was very difficult for her just, because she was active and she wanted to move around. So that was part of probably, that and shortness of breath were her worst things. So.
Talina, if I can ask, when you described the fatigue that your mom felt, was it that her muscles were fatigued and that's why her legs felt that way? Or was it more of a general body, full body exhaustion and,
She did talk a lot about her muscles in her legs just feeling really tired, and not really feeling like she could walk across a room. But she just also had an overall general fatigue where she had no energy. Like I said, she wasn't sleepy, she just had no energy. And so as soon as she'd sit down, she'd fall asleep. Her body just couldn't keep up.
Thank you, Talina. So let's do a quick show of hands here based on that comment. How many of you also feel is that fatigue was, this sort of full exhaustion where you have to sleep or you sit down to rest and you have to sleep because you're just that fatigued? Oh, many of you. Okay. Yes.
If I could add to that, one thing for me that I find extremely difficult is physically I'm exhausted. Physically I'm fatigued. My brain is not. So I will lay down to rest and I'm not able to rest. Physically I can rest, but my brain is going a million miles a second. I should be doing this, I want to do this, I want to do that. Oh, I wonder what's going on outside. All these other things, and I can't make my brain shut down, which is frustrating because you can't really rest then. That's the other thing.
Thank you. Yes?
I'm Jim Mclean. I was diagnosed in January. I get up at 6:30. I fix my own breakfast. I read the newspapers. And at 8:30, I'm taking a nap.
Thank you, Jim. So it sounds like we've heard from the panel and also for now from hearing from those of you in the audience that there's frequent resting that's required. I know I recall hearing one of our panelists sharing that when you're climbing the stairs, you take a rest, and even just with daily activities, showering, rest, dry off, rest. So, okay. Now, are there? Oh, yes, we have a hand back here. Right in the middle. There you go.
Hi, I'm Clarice. With the fatigue, I can relate to that. Excuse me. When I wake up every morning, I usually go right to the computer, and I have to sit there for at least 5 hours before I feel up to doing something. So for the half of the morning, I'm just exhausted. So I'll read the newspaper on the internet or have a hot beverage and cereal, and I'll look and want to vacuum, but I can't do it. Going back and forth to the kitchen, I'm just exhausted. So half of my day is just sitting, looking out the window until I feel like I can get up and do a chore. And by then, I can move around a little better as the evening progresses.
Okay. Yes, Laura.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add, it's very important that, for me anyway, that I don't allow that to take me over. Because in order for me or any of us to, prednisone added weight to me and I have to get it off. It's a catch-22 circle. In order to get it off, I have to exercise in order to go for a transplant. I go to the gym. I'm the only one there with oxygen, and I exercise. And then when I leave the gym, I also go and walk the mall or go grocery shopping. I do something so that, because I know once I get home and I get in that chair, I'm not getting back up for a couple hours. So, it really is hard for us when that fatigue starts to take over. Like Diane said, your brain goes a mile a minute, but you know your body can't because it's lacking that oxygen in your legs, but you have to try to keep them to move, at least for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. So what I'm going to do is, for those of you joining us on the webcast, we're going to be taking a few phone calls in just a minute. So use this time now to get your thoughts together and dial in if you'd like to share over the phone. And while we're doing that, I'd like to just ask if what is it like to recover from one of these symptoms, whether it's a very intense cough or a day of fatigue or a very intense bout of shortness of breath? What does it take to recover from one of those on a day-to-day basis? Would anybody like to? How do you sort of manage it as it happens? So with the fatigue, we heard the rest. Yes.
Bill, again, I think this leads, for me, it leads into your last number 4 there, and that's depression or emotional issues. Because if you come back from a busy day in the mall and shopping and whatever, keeping yourself busy and active, and you sit down and you lay down and it's only 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock and you've slept for an hour or more, you wake up and you go, shit, I still feel like I need to sleep some more. Or you sleep 8 or 9 or 10 hours at night. I sleep 9 to 10 hours at night. Thankfully, I'm retired. A lot of times I'll sleep 30 or 60 minutes in the day. So I think this needs to be mixed with the discussion about depression, because you say what does it feel like to get over that or get out to the next phase? You've gotten through that fatigue. You've got some rest. You feel better. And yet sometimes the mind is going, how long have I been putting up with this? What's it going to be like tomorrow? What's it going to be like next month? And all those things that we question as our health starts declining. And it's right there in front of your face all the time. So it's coming out of it. It's good. But I bet for most people there is a certain amount of, you got to identify that negative cloud hanging in there too and say, get out of my way, I'm busy, or recognize it for what it is and move on, or let it take over your life.
Thank you for raising that important point, Bill. How many of you, I mean, we saw that 23% of you in the room shared that depression was a significant symptom for you. So in terms of the emotional impact, we've heard depression, we've heard Heather mention the panic attacks. Would anybody else like to share this other impact of IPF that you experience and how you experience it? Yes.
Kind of to piggyback on what you were saying, but from a caregiver's perspective, that depression, it affects you guys. Of course it does. You're living with a disease. But from a caregiver's perspective, especially as a wife, and we have 2 of our 4 kids still at home. So to see that person in that condition and that helplessness that you have, like this week as Douglas is having a cold and can't be here, and he's really coughing, and it's like, what can I do? And you're just like, nothing. You want some tea, but so the depression does go a lot with, the fatigue, the coughing. He'll come from rehab, but then he's tired. He's done really great at rehab and still wants to do, but he can't. So that feeling of being boxed in and, just not being able to do, it does impact your life. And you get depressed, and he, and I know when it gets to him, he's like, I don't want to be sick. I don't like being sick. I want to do things. I want to travel. I want to, so it is quite depressing. And then for you as a caregiver to try to, encourage them, and I'm so grateful for the groups, for the Coalition of Pulmonary Fibrosis and, pulmonaryfibrosis.org, that I as a caregiver can look to reach to, the friends that I've made here in this room on Facebook. It helps me to hear other stories and know what other loved ones are going through as they are dealing with someone in their family, a husband, a father, mom, that's dealing with a disease that there is no cure for. It's not like the cancer. It's not, you go through an oncologist and it's a series of chemo and radiation. There is nothing. So you wait to be transplanted, or you're waiting to get into a clinical trial, and that waiting can be depressing.
Martina, thank you for sharing that perspective. We'll take one more comment.
When I got diagnosed, I was hit by a baseball bat. I was a 55-year-old, had 2 boys with girlfriends. So what you want in life is like you want them to get married and have kids so that you have grandchildren. And that was taken away from me. So I went back to work and thought that I could manage on my own. And I talked it over with my wife, and finally I came to the conclusion that I couldn't. So I went out and I did seek counseling. And because what hit me was there are things in life when you know you're having this disease, you don't want to discuss it with your caregiver or with your kids or with your friends or with close family, because that's you, and these negative thoughts, you want to share them with somebody who can put them into something that makes it livable. So I went to a counselor, and she did kids, so I was in the right place. And we talked about dying. We talked about where do you want to be buried? How are you feeling about that? How are you thinking about like what it will be to run without air, struggling for breathing, and all those kind of things? Exactly the things you don't want to talk to your wife about. So she helped me to get out of the depression, and I now try to be a lot of positivity. So.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let's take a minute, and can we summarize some of the comments that have been coming in from the web? Have we heard anything different from what we've been hearing in the room?
We are hearing a lot of very similar perspectives on the web with respect to depression and the impact on caregivers. There are people whose caregivers have been hospitalized for major depression, anxiety, or have had to deal with it because people say that you always have to be positive when you're treating with patients and that you can't express any of this, and that makes it hard for them. In addition to this, there's burden because, going back to the fatigue and coughing mentioned before, a lot of it has been tied to sleep disturbances, both for the patients and for their caregivers, and that's a big burden on everyone. And I think that's about it.
Okay, thank you. Let's do a quick show of hands here with regards to the sleep disturbances. How many of you also experience sleep disturbances as a symptom? Okay, so we see about 5 or 6 hands raised. Okay, and let's actually take some of the phone calls that are coming in now.
This is the operator. Our first comment comes from Karen Lane. Your line is open.
Hi, this is Karen Lane, and I'm calling just to kind of share, my observations from my husband who's diagnosed last fall. And one of the biggest symptoms related to that cough is the feeling of there's an isolation component to it. He could clear a crowd. We were in line to get into the Red Sox game for the World Series, and the look that people gave him for coughing, that thinking that he was, a contagious person. People don't understand the cough PF and what people do when they're smoking. So the secondhand smoke that we can't avoid will put him into this coughing fit. And it's the smokers that will make him feel that he's intruding on their space. And so it's just really, really difficult to explain to people, what this is, but there really is no treatment for it. And that the medication, that cough syrup, while it might dull the cough, puts them into that really just complicated state. It's a depressant. And so it's difficult to take that and try to still be active and be engaged in the community.
Karen, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Operator, do we have another caller on the line?
We have 4 commenters in the queue. Our next commenter is Mr. Peter Kaiser. Sir, your line is open. The biggest issue that I'm having to deal with was the cough and sleep. I have to sleep sitting up, and you're in my nap time right now, so I'm doing okay. And the only solution I have with cough, with the medication, is I chew ice, and that seems to help a lot. But I can only sleep at any given time for maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours before I have to get up and cough and go back to bed. So that's my biggest deal with sleep. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, and there were several heads nodding as you were speaking, so thank you for sharing that. Next caller, please, operator.
Our next commenter is Mr. John Myers. Sir, your line is open.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say that it's so obvious to me with regards to the disease, which I've been diagnosed with now for going on 3 years in November. It's so obvious that we don't all experience the same things at the same time with the same intensity. And specifically, what I deal with on a day-to-day basis is shortness of breath. I get tired. I don't have a lot of cough, thankfully, and I'm so thankful for that. And I don't experience a lot of depression, just by virtue of the fact that I have a phenomenal caregiver in my wife. But I think that what is really obvious to me too is, and what I've seen with regards to going to rehab, talking to other patients that might have IPF, is that they don't understand the disease at all. And for example, when the doctor came in and diagnosed me, he said, "John," he said, "you have pulmonary fibrosis." And it was like, "Oh, thank you." And, without knowing or understanding really how serious this disease is. And then the only other comment that I want to make is that as I talk to other patients or people or friends or whatever, they look at me and they say, "John, you look great." And, all I have that shows that I really have this disease is a cannula in my nose. And it's really hard for them to understand how serious this disease is. But also I just want to say thank you and for the opportunity to participate today. It's been a pleasure.
John, thank you for sharing your experiences with us. There were a lot of people that were agreeing with the comments that you just shared. Next caller, please.
We have 3 more commenters as time allows. Our next commenter is Leanne Storch. Your line is open.
Hello?
Yes, Leanne.
Yes, hi. Thank you for this. This has been very, very good. I just wanted to just reiterate about the lack of sleep. So many people that I've talked to or experienced the sleeping. And if people could get their sleep at night, then they would probably have better days because, it affects everything that you do. So, and I actually was diagnosed in 2003, and then in January 2014, I received a last lung transplant. So I'm actually going back to my experience, and I've had a lot of experience with the pulmonary fibrosis community. And I was one of the people that really got hard hit with the depression and anxiety. And I don't know some people don't have it, as the previous caller just said, and some people, I had issues growing up, but I didn't realize the impact the disease was going to have on my depression. And I almost was too late in getting help because where I was working, it was just a lot of things that kind of came all at once. And I was working at the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation, and I felt like it was very hard to share that with people because I was very much an inspiration because I had started the foundation in 2004. And it was hard to share that part of my journey because I didn't want to let the people down, that this is just part of it. But now I know that I should have gotten side of things and trying to be happy and positive. And so I was always trying to look at it that way and be as positive as I could. And towards the end, you know, after living with it for so long, it just kind of all hit me. And so I'm hoping that there will be, you know, people will be more apt to look for help, and also and I wasn't sleeping very well at all, and it really affected everything too.
Thank you, Leanne.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, I'm saying thank you for sharing your comments with us.
Thank you for all of this. I appreciate it very much.
Yes. Okay, so I know that we've run into our break time a little bit, but there's been such a great discussion, and I think we have learned so much from you on the symptoms and impacts of living with IPF. So thank you for sharing all of those experiences with us. Let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll get back and get started with topic 2.